Thus far, we've used text boxes to get input from the user. We've also handled the user's choice in message box, determining which button they've clicked in that message box. And now we're going to look at another type of dialog box in Visual Basic called an input box, in which the user can enter a string of their choice, and we can handle that string. Now, I will tell you that the input box is not part of C#. It's not a method built into C#, but I will show you towards the end of this video how we can incorporate Visual Basic's input box method into a C# project and utilize it. Let me first just demonstrate the input box to you. I'm going to run my application. So I'm going to click Demonstrate. It brings up the input box dialog. We have a prompt here of enter your first and last names, a title of enter name. I have a field down here where the user can enter some information, and I'm going to enter John Doe and click OK. And I then have a message box that comes up to display my output of welcome John, greetings to you and the whole Doe family. So we're parsing out the first name and the last name and using that in our prompt for the message box. So let's take a look at the code for using that input box. So in a previous video, we took a user's name from a text box and parsed it out, separating it into first name and last name, and using that in some output. We're basically going to do the same thing in this one, except we're going to use an input box method to get that first and last name. So start out with some variables, XYZ, FN, and LN as string. XYZ is going to be the value that's entered into the input box. FN and LN will hold the first name and last name. We're going to parse out of that value. And space lock, as we saw in a previous version, is going to be the location of the space character between first and last name that we'll use in extracting those two words. So here's our input box. XYZ, that's a variable, equals input box is my method. I have two parameters. The first one is the prompt that's going to be displayed in the dialog box or the input box. Enter your first and last names. And then I have a title here, enter name. That value that they entered, and when they click OK, is going to go into the XYZ variable. Then I'm going to find where that space is located using index of method of XYZ. If space lock is not a -1, I could have used space lock less than greater than -1 here. I chose to use the not logical operator. So I'm looking for if space lock equals -1, and then taking the not of that is just another way of doing that. We're going to extract our first name into the variable FN. We're going to extract last name into the variable LN. And then here's our message box that concatenates those two values as part of a string being displayed in the message box. If space lock is a -1, it's going to run this else clause, meaning it didn't find a space. And we'll simply say your entry was not in the format of first name, last name. Let me run this one more time so you can see that else clause function. If I type in demonstrate and I just type in a single name like David, I'm told the entry was not in the format of first name, last name. And I can then try again. So let's say it's David Johnson. And my dialog box then is welcome David, greetings to you and the whole Johnson family. Another thing we can do with an input box is give it a default value that will show up in that text box. So if I type in John Doe, and you put that in quotes, that's going to become our default value. And if I run this again, now John Doe is the default value. If I just click OK, it would accept that. Or I could replace it by typing something else into that text box. There are two more parameters here. When we run our input box, by default, it comes up in the center of the screen. But I could change that. I can have it come up as, let's say, 0, 0, and that's going to be the upper left-hand corner of my monitor. So this is the X coordinate from the left-hand side and the Y coordinate from the top. So 0, 0 is the upper left-hand corner. Let me run this again. And if I click demonstrate, you're going to see that comes up in the upper left-hand corner. Okay, so those are the different parameters that we can have in our input box. If I wanted to have the dialog box come up in the exact same position as my form, I could change the 0 to me.left and the second 0 to me.top. And I'm going to execute this one more time. So wherever I have my form, it doesn't matter where it's at. If I click demonstrate, it's going to bring that dialog box in the exact same upper left position as my form. So if it's down here, that's where it comes up. If I wanted my dialog box to come up a little bit below and to the right of my form, I could increment these values. I'm going to add 50 to each of them. Run my application again. And so now when I click demonstrate, the dialog box comes up a little bit to the right and down from my form. Doesn't really matter where my form is at. It's going to be offset that same value each time from our form, which we're referring to as me. Now here's the same project in C#. And if we look at the code, you see I've used an input box here, but there's a red squiggly line under it, and the compiler error is the name input box does not exist in the current context. So here's how we can fix that and actually make Inputbox part of our C# project, borrowing it from VB. I'm going to go into the project menu, come down to Add Reference, and that's going to bring up the Add Reference dialog box. I'm going to click the .NET tab on the left-hand side and scroll down and find Microsoft Visual Basic. I'm going to select that and say OK. And that now gives me access to the classes from the Visual Basic side. Now you notice the input box squiggly did not go away. Two things I have to do. First, I must come over and save my project. And then to reference the input box, I need to provide a path as to where that is located within our reference. So our reference was Microsoft.VisualBasic, and it has a class called the interaction class that contains the input box method. So I have to specify all of that. Microsoft.visualbasic.interaction.inputbox, and this is going to function exactly the same way. I'm going to add some comments here, just so we have a record of how to get there in our code. So we're going to choose the project menu, choose the Add Reference menu item, click on the .NET tab, choose Microsoft.VisualBasic in the dialog box, click OK, then save our project, and then we simply have to provide the full path of where that method is located within our reference. I'm going to drop the second portion of this string down so you can see the whole thing in our code. So the code is just like we did on the VB side. We have several variables here: string XYZ, FN, and LN. Space lock is an integer variable. We're going to get XYZ through the input box, find our space, and then if it does not equal -1, meaning it found a space, we will extract that into first name using substring, last name using substring, and display that whole thing in a message box. If space lock does equal -1, we're going to show a message box saying the entry was not in the correct format. There was no space that was located. Let me just run this so you can see it work here in C#. If I click demonstrate and I don't put anything in I'm told the entry was not in the correct format, but I just put in a single name, like Dwight, not in the correct format. And if I put in a full name, Frank Williams, I'm told, welcome Frank, greetings to you and the whole Williams family. I can use those same additional parameters we saw earlier on the VB side. I can specify a default value. So again, I'll just use the name Frank Williams. That'll be my default response in the dialog box. And we did me.left in the VB version. Here it's going to be this.left. Remember, this is the form in C#. Let's increment this by 100 pixels. And then the Y value will be this.top plus 100. And let me then run this so you can see this work in C#. There's my form. I click demonstrate. And so it now is 100 pixels between the left edge of my main form and this dialog, 100 pixels from the top to the top of the dialog. And my default is Frank Williams. If I click OK, my message box output is welcome Frank, greetings to you and the whole Williams family.